All sorts of different right-wing media types on the internet have increasingly been talking about a civil war that they believe is coming. And in some sense, a civil war that some of them seem to actually be welcoming. And whether it is because of those individuals or for other reasons, we now have 2 in 5 Americans, roughly 40% of Americans, who believe that within the next decade, there is going to be another civil war here in the United States. Now, when we say civil war and United States, what we think back to is the Civil War in the United States, of course, in the 19th century, which was a war essentially over slavery. It was between the Union and the Confederacy, the Union which wanted to end slavery, and the Confederacy which wanted to keep it. Now, there's been revisionist history which has been done to sort of glorify the Confederacy, or at least make it seem more benign. And usually the way that's done is they say it's not about a war to keep slavery. It's a war for states' rights, a fundamental conservative value. And sure, if what the states wanted a right to do was to keep slavery legal, then so be it. But really, it wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights. Now, that's BS. We don't have to get into more detail, but that is the false story that many of those who, I guess today, would still be on the side of the Confederacy, that's the story they like to tell about the first Civil War. And now we have an Economist YouGov poll wherein 40% of Americans believe we are heading towards another civil war. Now, let's look at a couple of the different things that are in this poll. First and foremost, do Americans expect political divisions and violence to increase over the next few years? And the answer is that on political divisions, 2/3 of Americans believe we will be more politically divided and that political division is likely to increase. And on political violence, 65% believe that political violence has increased. And looking ahead, 62% believe it will continue to increase. Now, what is the partisan split here? This is very, very important. For those who say that in the last year and a half, the country has become more divided, Republicans are more likely than independents and Democrats to say that. Now, what has happened during that time? Well, a Democrat, Joe Biden, became president of the United States. The mere presence of Biden, they believe, has made the country more divided. And if you look at looking ahead, do you think the amount of political division is more likely to increase, stay the same, or decrease? It is Republicans more than Democrats that believe political division will increase, but it's not a big difference. This is actually quite interesting because it's only a 14-point split. The country is mostly on the same page, both Republicans and Democrats. 58% of Democrats think there will be more political division and 72% of Republicans. It is a difference, but it is not a dramatic partisan difference. Now, on the issue of civil war, this is very, very important and disturbing. Take a look at these numbers. Among adult citizens in general, 43% say it is very or somewhat likely that there will be another civil war in the next 10 years. And this is where the partisan split is somewhat more significant. Among Democrats, those, for example, who are strong Democrats, 40% believe a civil war is very or somewhat likely, whereas among strong Republicans, 54% believe a civil war is very or somewhat likely. That is a significant difference, but also it's not like the 70-20 type thing. There are questions you can ask people, and the partisan split is significantly more dramatic. I'm struggling to think of which ones they would be, but on issues related to, for example, guns, sometimes you see a massive partisan split. 14 points on civil war is not like a dramatic split. Now, where I believe you would see a significant difference would be if you ask folks, what do you believe would cause such a civil war? What do you believe would cause such a civil war? My instinct is, and this is something that you would have to do a poll on, if you ask the left-wingers, what do you think would cause the civil war? I think most left-wingers would say right-wingers launching a civil war. And if you asked the right-wingers what would cause a civil war, I think they would mostly say the left-wingers would cause a civil war. In other words, I think in different terms, you would see both the left and the right say that it would be the right that would precipitate and take action on that civil war. The leftists would say the right wingers are going to do it because they don't like the ways in which society is changing. And the right wingers would say we had no choice because look at what the leftists were doing to our country. Very different moral frameworks in terms of who is responsible. But I think it would be, in a sense, an agreement in that it would be the rightists who actually launch it. And the rightists would say, well, we had no choice because of what the leftists have done to this country. Not particularly pleasing numbers. I mean, when nearly half the country thinks in the next decade there will be a civil war, it doesn't seem to be boding particularly well. We're going to follow these numbers, and it would be good to have other polling as well, because it is increasingly a topic. I mean, later in the show, actually, we're going to have a clip of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who just got dinged for $49 million in a defamation suit. He seems to be trying to precipitate that civil war and is predicting it, I think he said in 71 days, oddly specific. But we'll get to that Alex Jones clip a little bit later on in the show. Republicans have seen the polling, and they are terrified that running strongly against all abortions is going to crush them in November. So we have to understand now on the left, the Republicans have seen the polling. They know the numbers. In the aftermath of the repeal of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, we have seen a dramatic shift in polling for these November midterm elections. And I've told you that we're going to look at the numbers tomorrow or Thursday, but the odds that Democrats keep the Senate are now roughly 2-1. Democrats still expected to lose the House, but by a smaller margin than at any point during this midterm election cycle. And much of it is because of the anger about Roe v. Wade being overturned and the fundamental right to an abortion in most cases disappearing. Republicans are aware of this, and we are now seeing a number of different Republicans, either in interviews or on their websites, change or certainly restructure the way that they talk about abortion, some of them removing altogether their anti-choice stances from their respective websites. So last week, I brought you the story of this Democrat in Michigan who won in a swing district in a special election by focusing in on abortion, just straight up won. And it's abundantly clear that this is a big risk for Republicans. We now have a clip from, this is from yesterday or maybe the day before yet. No, this is from yesterday. This is John I believe it's pronounced O'D, might be O'Day. This is the Republican Senate candidate in Colorado. He went on Fox News and he made it very clear. He supports women's right to choose an abortion early in the pregnancy and even later when there are particular circumstances. Take a listen to this, a very different sounding Republican.
Martha, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
You know, your race was a very interesting one to watch. You beat a candidate who was more of a Trump supporter. You are sort of running in a more moderate lane, and yet your opponent, the current Senator Michael Bennet, is looking to sort of peg you that way a little bit more. Here's an example in an ad that dropped on Friday. Watch this.
Dropped.
It makes the race for Senate even more important.
Michael Bennet has always fought to protect a woman's right to make her own health care decisions.
But Joe O'Day opposes the law protecting abortion access in Colorado.
So we want to give you a chance to respond to that, because clearly the Roe v. Wade decision is becoming a factor in races all across the country. We're going to see a lot of ads like that. Are they accurately portraying your view on this, sir?
Oh, that ad's dishonest. It's at best. I came out early on in this election and said that I supported a woman's rights early on in the pregnancy and even later on, with mitigating circumstances. So I've been very vocal about that issue, ran my primary on that, and we ended up winning. So
this is very interesting, because I can't tell you that if Joe O'Day makes it to the Senate, that he would actually be a pro-choice vote. I can't say that. All we can look at is what he is saying today. And he has made, I believe, the correct calculation that at this point, when it comes to Democrats and even moderate Republicans, it is not a good idea to take these wacky anti-choice views in a state like Colorado when you're running in the Senate. Now, if you are running in a particular red district for the House in Alabama, it's a very different story. But he's correctly sort of taking the pulse of the electorate in Colorado and the pulse of the country. And if he is going to defeat Bennett and get to the Senate with that electorate and the entire state of Colorado as the voting constituency, he can't be a wacky anti-choicer. Now, he may be an anti-choicer personally, but he has made the correct calculation that he can't really be running that way. This is not super unique. We're seeing instances of this elsewhere as well. In Arizona 4 days ago, Blake Masters, right-wing nut, backtracks on abortion and scrubs his campaign website. This is all from the last week. So Blake Masters realizing I might want to ease up on some of the anti-abortion stuff. Another example here, Republican congressional candidate and state senator Tom Barrett totally removed the values section of his campaign website, which touted his anti-abortion position and history with the pro-life movement. Also making the calculation that, listen, even if these are my views, and even if this is how I'm ultimately going to vote if the people elect me, I don't necessarily want to be promoting this and making it front and center. This is a very important shift. Now, what are going to be the substantive repercussions of such a shift? We actually don't know yet, because part of it is, are these Republicans actually becoming mildly pro-choice? Or are they just lying because they see that that's what they need to do in order to get themselves elected, and it won't actually change anything if and when they do? It's a predictive question. We're just guessing. We don't have the answer. But the fact that they're feeling the need to change their messaging on this issue is already extraordinarily important. Let me know what you make of this. Are these candidates, is there going to be a wave of pro-choice Republicans? Or are these merely the lies they're willing to tell in order to get themselves elected because they've sort of put their finger to the wind and feel the way that it's blowing? Let me know. Tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern, it is finally here. I know many of you have been waiting for so long. It is the David Pakman Show members only town hall. We will open up the phone lines exclusively to our members tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Every member is welcome to participate and chat with me. It will be streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. So everybody is free to watch. But we will just be inviting our members to participate in the town hall. Still time to sign up at joinpakman.com. Let's talk today about why right-wingers and Republicans seem to hate. They really seem furious with electric vehicles. And we've talked about this anecdotally over the last few weeks. There have been these clips of Marjorie Taylor Greene making completely incorrect claims about people are being enslaved by being forced to get electric vehicles, just completely wacky stuff. But let's actually think it through a little bit, because when you take it at the top level, you would think that right-wingers would love electric vehicles. Think about it. They hate and complain all the time about high gas prices. Electric vehicles don't use gas, so that would be something that should appeal to right-wingers. Right-wingers often have this kind of stereotypical alpha beta male mentality. They see fast cars as indicative of alpha male status. Well, electric vehicles are really fast, so you'd think that would be something that would appeal to them. They claim to like self-sufficiency and not depending on others. You can quite literally charge your electric vehicle at home with solar power harvested from the solar panels that you own. You don't need anybody else to help you. You'd think that that would appeal to them. You don't need a gas station. You don't need a fuel tanker to deliver the gas to the gas station. Russia can't mess with gas and affect the gas you get at the gas station. Think they would love it. And sort of along that same line, I mean, you could end the dependence on foreign oil as well, which is something right-wingers claim to love. But they don't love electric vehicles. In fact, they seem to hate them. And it's another one of these examples where you have their stated principles, and then you have what's politically convenient or inconvenient. And the reality is, right-wingers tend to love oil and gas, fossil fuels. They see burning fossil fuels as a good thing in many cases, and they like angering people on the left. And so there's a part of this that is that right-wingers want to protect the established industry of oil and gas, both for its own sake and to anger liberals. And they see electric vehicles as a threat to fossil fuels. And that's true. Electric vehicles are a threat to fossil fuels, and that's a good thing. You also have, the Toyota Prius specifically has become a sort of emblem, a microcosm of what the right doesn't like. Right-wingers often see the Prius as a very beta energy vehicle. They see it as a form of left-wing virtue signaling. Now, the reality is we are very much beyond that. You can get, put Tesla aside, you can get a Porsche electric vehicle, Volkswagen, Audi, Hyundai. What's more alpha than a Ford F-150 electric, which is sold out until who knows when? But the stereotype remains, and it conflicts with what right-wingers like. You've then got the range issue, or the supposed issue. The right-wingers sort of idealizing the great American road trip. They say, well, on my electric vehicle, I can only go 250 miles on a charge, or 275 or 300 or 330 or 370 or soon to be over 400. But who actually drives that long without stopping? Seriously, like if you just on a normal road trip, even if you can fill your tank with 500 miles worth of gasoline, who's really driving a full 400 or 500 miles? When's the last time you drove 300 miles without stopping? It's not really an impediment to the great American road trip. The right thinks things that the left likes must be bad things. And since the left, generally speaking, likes electric vehicles, the right ends up having to say that they are bad. And it is a very strange thing, because when you actually go point by point, they should be loving these electric vehicles. Oh, and by the way, I shouldn't forget, the electric vehicles don't make the big boy vroom vroom engine noise. And I think that that's something that right-wingers also don't like. So by all accounts, this is something that they should embrace if they were paying attention to their principles. The principles go in the toilet as soon as they conflict with what's politically convenient. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. By the way, going now from electric vehicles to climate change more broadly, we've talked before about this. It snowed in winter, so climate change must be made up. We've talked about that idea before. We've heard it often on Fox News. Many right-wingers love to point out when it's cold in winter somewhere, it must disprove climate change, part of which is record high temperatures during certain parts of the year. Well, Tucker Carlson is throwing his hat into the ring on this. Tucker Carlson, in a segment during which he blurts out a string of lies, seems to say that the existence of winter disproves climate change. These people, do you think they even believe this stuff themselves?
But they're not laughing anymore. The Europeans have discovered that the real threat to human civilization is not global warming. It never was global warming. Oh. The real threat to people is global cooling, otherwise known as winter. Far more people freeze to death every year than die of heat. In 2019, for example, 4 times as many people died of cold as of heat.
Now, if you have been watching the show, you know I already debunked that about a month ago. And we'll get back to those numbers in a moment.
That's according to the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. So when temperatures in Europe begin to drop a few months from now, this is
right, because it's winter.
A huge problem. And that will be obvious to everyone. It's not global warming, it's global cooling. That's what's going to kill your grandmother. And when everyone understands that perfectly well, a lot of things are going to happen. The status quo will crumble. Factories will close. Unemployment will rise. Disposable income will disappear.
It's going to be an economy-crushing dystopia as soon as all of that happens. Now, much of what Tucker Carlson is saying is just wrong. And I know intuitively maybe that's obvious, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about what kills more, heat or cold. Heat kills more than cold. If you look globally, right? I mean, we're a planet here. We have an Earth, as Donald Trump. We have a world, as Donald Trump once said. Way more people on Earth have the ability to heat their environment when it's cold than the number that have the ability to cool their environment when it's hot. In other words, more people have heat than air conditioning. Heat-related death over time. More than 5 million people die each year globally because of excessively hot or cold conditions. Okay? The heat-related deaths continue to climb. If you ask the question, which kills more, extreme heat or extreme cold, you look at the data from NOAA, and NOAA has found that on average in the United States, there's 134 heat-related deaths versus 30 cold-related deaths on, I believe that's a per capita adjusted number. So Tucker Carlson is wrong about what he's saying. Now, maybe you think Tucker can't possibly be this stupid. No one could possibly be this stupid. And he's saying these things knowing that they're not true. Well, that may absolutely be true. He may just be lying. It's still really bad for him to tell those lies, but he may just be lying. And it is stunning. You know, he talks about Europe. It's very popular to make fun of Europe if you're an American right winger. Europe, by and large, understands and accepts the science on this stuff. And they look at the American right wing and they say, what the hell is wrong with people? I understand wanting lower taxes. I even understand wanting less regulation, all things being equal. But denying the science of climate change, that doesn't make any sense. And indeed, it doesn't. Indeed, it doesn't. He may be just lying, but it's still really bad. We'll have that Tucker clip on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. Today, we're going to be speaking with Dan Cannon, who's a civil rights lawyer and a law professor at the University of Louisville. He is also author of the book Pleading Out: How Plea Bargaining Creates a Permanent Criminal Class. Dan, really great having you on. I appreciate your time.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, I think maybe to start, it would make sense to talk about how this sort of like a plea deal industrial complex started. I think many of us intuitively know just because you've been charged with a crime doesn't mean that there will eventually be a trial and a verdict in the way that we watch sometimes on television in major trials. How did this develop that many cases don't make it to trial? Who was motivated to make that the reality?
Sure, and I would go so far as to say almost all cases don't make it to trial. Where we're sitting at right now is a 97% plea bargain rate, which is, you know, just to sort of grasp the how big that is. You know, that's 3 out of every 100 criminal cases that might go to trial, right? You know, on average, and that's the entire country. This is way, way, way far beyond what anybody else is doing in the rest of the world. The rest of the world, you know, even in comparable legal systems, places like the United Kingdom and Canada and so on. I mean, the highest you get is to 80%, and even that is kind of extreme. So nobody does it as much as we do, and what the result has been pretty much the death of the jury trial altogether for all intents and purposes. The community has been completely removed from processes of criminal justice. And if you look historically at how and why this originated, you know, this uniquely American thing that we do, you got to go back all the way to the beginning of the 19th century and look at the early labor movement in the United States. And when that was gathering steam, that is the same time that the plea bargain sort of took off in New England, right? So you have this post-industrial revolution situation where the working classes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And up until 1830, you know, plea bargaining was taboo. There was, I mean, you would see prosecutors actually get prosecuted for trying to make deals with defendants in the way that they do now. So it was completely off the table and just wasn't happening, or if it was happening, we didn't know about it. Then in Massachusetts, you see that number tick up very quickly. By the 1850s, it's 50% of all criminal cases are ending in a guilty plea. By the 1880s, it's 88%, right? So almost all criminal cases are ending in a guilty plea by the end of the 19th century in Massachusetts. And what's happening there is that there's this giant explosion of working class people, right? And at the beginning in the 1830s, the courts and every other American institution is working really, really hard to break the back of organized labor. You've got the first strikes are happening in the 1820s. And then the first Federation of Labor Unions happens in New York in 1834. And so the ruling classes are sort of panicking and trying to figure out, you know, how to fix this whole thing. First thing they start doing is prosecuting groups of workers under conspiracy statutes. So you get big groups of them at a time and say, all right, you know, you're going to get together and try to get higher wages, or shorter work days or something like that, and we're going to prosecute you for a conspiracy. And it becomes pretty apparent early on that that's not going to work. By the 1840s, they've sort of scrapped that whole idea because there's just too many of them, and there's the working classes are getting too big, and there's working class people for the first time sitting on these criminal juries. So the response of the ruling classes at that time, as I talk about in my book, is to, number one, take a lot of power away from juries. Juries are not nearly as powerful now as they were back then. And the other one is to introduce the plea bargain. So what that allows them to do is to quickly and quietly prosecute lots of individual workers one by one, rather than trying to smack a whole bunch of them at a time with the hammer of the criminal law, which they knew that wasn't going to work. They were just too outnumbered.
In the modern era, what is the advantage? We'll talk first about the prosecutors. I mean, it seems if everybody went to trial, they would not have nearly the workforce that would be required to try that number of cases, right? I mean, it just seems like an impossibility.
Yeah. So what you see in situations where in the few situations where you've actually reduced the number of plea bargains is that it does force prosecutors to make tough decisions. Okay? So you look at the historical example of Alaska. For a very brief period of time in Alaska, you had an attorney general come in and say, this is, we're going to stop doing plea bargaining. We're going to reduce the number of plea bargains. Like all the plea bargains are going to come through me.
Yep.
And what I've heard since I was in law school is that if somebody does something like that, it's going to crash the whole system, right? Like we're just not going to have a criminal justice system anymore because the wheels of justice are going to stop turning, and all these jury trials are going to make it to where we just can't do anything.
Right.
But that's not true if you look at the historical example of Alaska and some of these other places where this has happened. What happened in Alaska was lots more cases went to trial. But the system didn't crash, it adapted and it got more intelligent. So at the point in time in Alaska where this new attorney general took over, the Alaskan prosecutors were rejecting about 4% of all the cases that police brought to them. So cops would come in with a case, and if it was a bad case, if it was a good case, it didn't matter because the prosecutors knew that they could push somebody into some kind of plea bargain and get a conviction, right? Taking plea bargaining off the table means that the prosecutors have to be more selective. And so what happens right off the bat is that the prosecutors go from rejecting 4% of all those cases to rejecting 40% of all those cases. So that forces prosecutors to make decisions, right? To come up with priorities for what they're going to prosecute and what they're really, what the community's priorities really are. And so far from crashing the system, it adapts. It becomes more intelligent. The prosecutors are making more intelligent decisions, and that forces the police to cross their T's and dot their I's and do more diligent homework. And so if you think about the situation that we have now, police know they're going to get a conviction. They know that they're going to, they out of most of the 11 million arrests that happen in the United States every year are going to result in some kind of conviction. And so they don't have to have any real evidence that a crime was committed. They don't have to, they're not anticipating that they're ever going to be put on the stand or have to account for the charges that they've levied against somebody in any sort of meaningful way. And if you reduce the number of plea bargain cases, even just by a little bit, that whole situation starts to change because police know that the case is more likely to go to trial, and so they have to be more careful in what they bring to prosecutors in the first place.
Now, from the standpoint of the defendants, the accused, I think many of us have this instinct that if we were ever in such a situation and we felt that we were innocent, we would fight to the end and demand a jury trial and so on and so forth. What are the incentives that are there for those who are charged to end up taking plea deals?
Well, it's every incentive in the world, isn't it? So that's what we've decided to do in the United States that's so different from the rest of the world. Here, we've decided that we're going to give every carrot and every stick to prosecutors so they can end up with a conviction somehow, right? Mm-hmm. So and this was all still sorting itself out by the late 20th century. And then there was this Supreme Court case called Bordenkircher versus Hayes, where you have right down the road here in Lexington, Kentucky, you've got a 29-year-old black horse transporter who gets picked up for trying to cash a bad check worth $88, right? So he writes a bad check. Prosecutor comes to him and says, "Oh, it looks like you were in trouble 10 years ago over something. And so what you're going to do is for this $88 check, you're going to take 5 years in prison." And Paul Hayes says, "I don't want to take 5 years in prison." Prosecutor says, "Well, if you don't take 5 years in prison, then I'm going to hit you with this habitual offender charge, and that carries a mandatory penalty of life in prison." And he's like, "I don't want to do life in prison over an $88 check," but that's the kind of power the prosecutor has. We're still sort of sorting out whether or not we wanted to do that. In that case, Paul Hayes didn't want to take the deal. He went to trial, got convicted, and got a life sentence. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court at that time in 1978 essentially says, yeah, it's the prosecutor's job to persuade a defendant to give up their right to trial. And they can do that by hook or by crook. They can do whatever they want to get a defendant to plead guilty and to forego as the prosecutor says, the inconvenience of the trial. And so that case sort of throws the floodgates open for prosecutors to use anything and everything that they want. So, if you're charged with murder, let's say, the prosecutor can offer carrots, can say, look, we're going to bust these charges down to a wanton endangerment, and you're going to do 6 months probation because I just don't want to take it to trial, and I don't think it's a very good case, but I need a conviction. So, take it or leave it, and you'd be hard pressed to say, I'm going to leave that on the table.
Right.
Conversely, if a prosecutor wants to proceed as though it is a death penalty case and threaten a defendant with literal death if they don't take a plea bargain to, let's say, life without prison, they can do that too. And in fact, when you look at the numbers, one of the more chilling statistics that I've got in my book is that since the 1970s, 75% of the people on death row could have avoided a death sentence by taking the plea offer that the prosecutor gave to them. So in other words, the prosecutor has the power to say, if you don't take this deal, I'm going to put the death sentence on the table. It's not on the table until you say yes or no. But if you make me go to trial, well, death penalty's on the table. So prosecutors just had this enormous power to alter the legal landscape in any given case that in the United States that they just don't have in other countries.
Is it easier for wealthier defendants to avoid taking plea deals in the sense that all else being equal, a long trial costs more money?
Sure. For reasons that I said before, long trials cost more money, but they're also more high profile, right? They're more visible to the public. The media pays more attention to what's going on in these high profile cases. So you get somebody like a Jeffrey Epstein that's going to come in with quite obviously is guilty, but comes in with a team of 100 high-paid lawyers that are going to make the prosecution work for anything that they end up with. And so the prosecutor starts to look at that situation saying, all right, this is going to be very time consuming. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very expensive. And it could be very humiliating if we lose, right? This could have political consequences and all this other stuff. And it's going to be very much in the public eye. So rather than go through, the hoops of a trial, let's try to get them into a place where they're going to take a plea. And in fact, that is exactly what happened down in Florida with Jeffrey Epstein and the initial disastrous prosecution that feds tried to carry on there. And the victims were completely cut out of that prosecution. And Epstein got a slap on the wrist for, abhorrent conduct. And that is the kind of treatment that the wealthy typically can expect to receive in the United States. So when people talk about there being two different justice systems here, that's what they mean.
It seems the other component to this also is the use of pretrial detention and the ability to make bail. I mean, as a very general concept, I think it's probably more difficult to mount a defense, all else being equal, if you are being detained up until the time of your trial rather than out. Can you talk a little bit about that and the effect of pretrial detention and possibly the unequal application of pretrial detention on the sort of plea bargain chances, I guess?
Sure. So cash bail, like the plea bargain, is one of those things that we've carried forward, from an overtly classist system in the 19th century until now. Right. So, it's yet another gun that the prosecution can put to a defendant's head to say, like, listen, if you don't take this deal, you're just going to stay locked up there until we have a trial. And that could be 2 years from now. That could be 3 years from now. So if you can't post bail, tough luck. There you sit in the county jail. And these county jails, as I'm sure you know, are oftentimes not friendly places. They're so unfriendly, in fact, and especially metropolitan jails are so unfriendly that you see defendants taking deals where they end up going to prison just because prisons are a little friendlier than the county jail, right?
Wow.
For example, you see that a lot. But basically, it's this arsenal of tools that the prosecution has, cash bail being one of them, to make sure that every defendant gets pressed into taking a deal of some kind. I had a client that I represented in a civil rights case who insisted on his innocence in these criminal charges that were levied against him way out in rural Kentucky. And he sat there in jail waiting for his trial to come up for 3 years. Well, the maximum sentence that he could have come up with, that he could have been subjected to, was only 2 years on the original charges. So he sits there in 3 years waiting for his trial, and then goes to trial, and no police show up, and they dismiss the charges. And so that is the kind of thing that, for people that insist on their right to trial, they're going to get punished for it. It's what we call the trial penalty. It's what happened to Paul Hayes. It's what's happened to countless clients that I've had. And it's what happens all over America every single day.
In those situations, I think this was an issue with Donziger, in fact, when the strictest penalty you could get is less than the time that you've been detained pre-trial. Is there some recourse or remedy in those cases?
Well, you'd think there would be, right?
Yeah.
You'd think that, and that was, the case with my guy down in Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
But the federal courts are so hostile in most of the country to these civil rights actions that you're not very likely to get anywhere. And especially since this is such a common thing, like for people to stay in jail way longer than they should stay in jail for one reason or another.
Yeah.
That most of those folks that have been aggrieved by something like that in the system can't even find a civil lawyer to represent them to vindicate their rights. Certainly not in rural parts of the country where this happens all the time. And when they do find someone to represent them, the civil rights actions tend to fall flat on their face because you've got these judges that are hostile to these kinds of actions to begin with.
Right. The book is pleading out how plea bargaining creates a permanent criminal class. We've been speaking to the book's author, law professor Dan Cannon. Dan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it does seem as though we're getting to the end stage of Donald Trump's complete and total derangement over the 2020 election. We are just, 8 weeks, 7.5 weeks, roughly, from the 2022 midterms, and Donald Trump is now demanding that he be made the president immediately, or that a new 2020 presidential election be held. This is obviously something only somebody who is very sick could even think of demanding. Donald Trump, of course, posting this to his platform Truth Social.
Truth Social.
A platform which is having its fair share of trouble, which we will get to in a moment. Donald Trump posting yesterday, and this is bottom of the barrel stuff, guys. Quote, "So now it comes out conclusively that the FBI buried the Hunter Biden laptop story before the election, knowing that if they didn't, Trump would have easily won the 2020 presidential election. This is massive fraud and election interference at a level never seen before in our capital C country. Remedy, declare the rightful winner," Trump means make me president, "or, and this would be the minimal solution, declare the 2020 election irreparably compromised and have a new capital E election immediately." He seems to be saying that the FBI not helping him as he sees it is some kind of election fraud, tampering, or interference. And by the way, the FBI sort of did tip the scales for Trump in the first election that he won. I mean, think back to 2016. James Comey already did a press conference about the Hillary email stuff. It was a closed subject. And then right before the election, for reasons that are still not clear, James Comey comes out and does another press conference about that very same investigation, even though there were not charges forthcoming and Hillary Clinton was not going to be charged with anything. That is the reality of the situation. And think how we're roughly, it's funny, we're about 666 days since the presidential election of 2020. It's just a coincidence. And I don't know if that's tomorrow or the next day. We're roughly, it will be soon 666 days since the 2020 presidential election. And Donald Trump wants to either be reinstated or wants a brand new election. It's as likely that Mike Pillow or Eric Trump are going to be put in the Oval Office in the next 2 years as it is Trump is going to.
Over 54 countries have now been taken by the machines.
Exactly. Remember this op-ed from November of 2020? It was written by Mick Mulvaney. Remember Mick Mulvaney, who for a while was Donald Trump's chief of staff. And the subject was, if he loses, Trump will concede gracefully. He'll fight hard to make sure the results are fair. And in the end, he'll accept the result, whatever it is. That was Mick Mulvaney writing in November of 2020, specifically November 7th of 2020. How humiliating is this? How long is it going to go? And I know that we all joked around. We had sort of a good time, even though it was like laughing to avoid crying, saying when it was February of 2021, when it was April of 2021, we joked around and we said, wow, how long are they going to keep doing this? Are they going to go all the way up to the 2022 midterms talking about reinstatement? And Trump continues to talk about it. And Mike Pillow continues to talk about it. And other hangers on continue to talk about reinstatement. We are now getting to the November 22 midterm. The question now is, are they going to keep talking about reinstatement beyond the November 22 midterm, which would be just another level altogether? It is wacky, wacky stuff. And the next layer of trouble is that the platform on which Donald Trump is publishing these deranged tirades is in very serious trouble. Let's talk about that next. I have to admit, when I am taking pleasure in someone else's misery, I admit it to you guys. I do. I don't hide that. Donald Trump's Truth Social is collapsing.
Truth Social.
They owe more than $1 million to their web hosting company. And according to Tom Boggioni for Salon.com, the platform is rapidly heading for bankruptcy. I admit it. I am taking pleasure in this. I am. Donald Trump's Truth Social is facing some very serious financial problems. They reportedly owe the web hosting company that they use more than $1 million already. They are having problems with some of their intellectual property trademark registrations. In a filing this week, Digital World Acquisition, which planned to take the Trump Media and Technology Group public, is now issuing warnings about what the future may bring. Isn't that sad? Quote, the company warned this week that its businesses could be damaged if Trump becomes less popular or there are further controversies that damage his credibility. The company has seen its stock price plunge nearly 75% since its March peak and reported in a filing last week it lost $6.5 million in the first half of the year. The company's financial base has begun to erode. The Trump company stopped paying RightForge, a conservative web hosting service, in March and now owes it more than $1 million. This is I'm going to tell you guys, this is a delightful fate. And I have to tell you, I'm not taking pleasure in this because I want some authoritarian censorship of the platform. I'm taking pleasure in it because it's the free market deciding. The platform is so lame. No one cares. It's not popular. Producer Pat mentioned on the bonus show yesterday that many people have accounts only to be able to see what other people are posting, not because they want to post anything, just because you have to have an account, at last we checked, in order to see the things that are posted. Here's a report from MSNBC about this.
Former President Trump's social media platform is facing money problems. Right now, Truth Social doesn't have a guaranteed source of income, and if it doesn't get any, it could go bust. A new SEC filing from the company planning to take Truth Social public is warning of damages to the already slowing business if the former president, quote, becomes less popular or there are further controversies that damage his credibility. Now, this comes as the platform has reportedly stopped paying its web hosting service and now owes it more than $1 million. This, according to Fox Business. Let's bring in NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins. And here's why we're bringing in Ben, because you're an expert on the internet.
This is really the best.
So my first question is just how popular or not popular is Truth Social? I mean, does the former president have reason to be concerned?
Yes.
It's not popular at all. Let's be real about this. Donald Trump is the primary user on that platform, and even he only gets a few thousand likes, or what they call them, retruths per post there.
Truth.
His website exists so it can be screenshotted and posted onto bigger platforms, Facebook and Twitter, places that he has been banned from. He wants to be able to tweet. This is his way to tweet.
All right. Anyway, so I think you guys get what's going on. This is what's great about this is the right lives in an imaginary world. And one of the totally fantasy world beliefs that the right has constructed about social media, obviously that right wingers are being overwhelmingly censored and oppressed by the jackbooted terms of service moderators or whatever the case may be, but also that there's just massive demand from right wingers for a so-called free speech platform, and that as soon as one is available, they're going to flock to it right away. Twitter was copied over into Truth Central. It's just a clone. It looks just like Twitter. They just copied it. So when it comes to the functionality, you would think that if there was really such a demand, that wouldn't be an impediment to people going over to Truth. But people aren't doing it. And it's because there isn't actually demand for that. I hope that it fails, and it seems to be going in that direction. Yesterday, I told you about Republican Senator Lindsey Graham threatening riots if Donald Trump is indicted. InfoWars conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who, by the way, really doesn't like me.
Thank your lucky stars every day you're not Dave Pakman.
I know, he doesn't like me. Alex Jones is now joining in with MAGA World in predicting violence. Now, as always, his predictions are more specific. Take a listen to this.
In the next 71 days, we're going to see some very violent fireworks. I would predict racially motivated mass shootings, bombings, poisonings.
We're going to see poisonings and bombings, he says.
Attacks on power supplies being blamed on the right wing. They intend to bring in a full dictatorship in the next 71 days.
Who will be the dictators?
And we are all strapped to this thing. This is such a dangerous time. And I would advise the globalists who are mid-level that think they're about to have a leftist revolution.
I like that mid-level globalists. If you're a high-level globalist or a low-level globalist, you don't have to worry. Globalist, internationalist, Trotskyite socialists, unlike Obama, Trudeau, Macron, and the rest of these Zio beasts. Yeah. All right. Last few seconds.
Globalists don't actually plan at the higher levels to have that. They plan on having a civil war that brings down America, and you'll be the fall guy.
Right. Very, very scary stuff. Now, I do wonder if there's a donation maybe of $29.99 to Alex Jones that might help stop the globalists. I don't know. Is it more upsetting? Honestly, is it more upsetting that Alex Jones says this stuff? Or is it more upsetting that some people believe it? Or is it more upsetting that some people believe it so much that then they donate money as a result? Which of those three things is the most disturbing? And this is very similar to yesterday's segment on Lindsey Graham. It sounds to me like Alex Jones is predicting that Trumpists are going to do all these things, but he's incentivized to make it look like they're not really Trumpists if they do it. Because remember, he said, there's going to be bombings and there's going to be poisonings and there's going to be attacks on our water supplies, different, what did he say? Power sources. And it's going to be blamed on the right. He already is preemptively, he just got dinged almost 50 million for lies related to supposed false flags. And he's already out there doing his false flag dog and pony show again. It's quite a wild situation, but there's Alex Jones joining in. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is an individual who called in very, very confused about my family background. Listen to this.
Hi, David. So I can't help but notice that you're Jewish and from Argentina.
That's true. So far, beautiful.
Do you have a family history that has ties to Germany?
No.
Like, are you from Argentina because your family escaped the Holocaust and fled to Argentina along with a lot of other people who did that?
Well, yes, to some degree, not from Germany. Basically, 3 of my 4 grandparents had families that went to Argentina well before World War II. 1 grandparent went to Argentina from Poland very, very close to World War II, but nothing Germany related.
From Germany?
No.
And if so, is that part of your motivation for doing the show, is to fight back against fascism and Nazi ideology that the Trump administration is bringing back to the mainstream?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, yes, part of the reason for doing this show is to fight against right-wing authoritarianism, fascism, etc. But because I think those things are bad, not because my family is from Germany. So certainly some elements in that voicemail that are mildly tethered to reality, but the big picture, not quite so much. But I still appreciate the opportunity to clarify. Folks, the member town hall is tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday, August 31st. Member town hall, okay?
Oh, the bonus show where you want to make money. Everybody else that makes money to fund themselves is bad.
Yes, when you become a member at joinpacman.com, you get access to the bonus show, and you also get invited to participate in the members-only town halls. It will be streaming live for everybody on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, but the participants will be limited to our website members. You can become a member in mere moments by signing up at joinpacman.com. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Buoyed by a number of different legislative accomplishments and a rising approval rating, Joe Biden is going to give a primetime speech to the nation about the soul of the United States on Thursday evening in Philadelphia. I will be covering it live in prime time. We will talk about that speech and the timing on the bonus show. We will also talk about the launch of NASA's giant moon rocket, which has sadly been delayed after an engine issue. I was looking forward to this. We will talk about it on the bonus show. And Pennsylvania Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman is calling on Joe Biden to move towards decriminalizing marijuana ahead of Biden's visit to Pennsylvania on Thursday, which I agree with. We will talk about all of those things and more when I am joined by producer Pat on today's bonus show. Get instant access by signing up at joinpacman.com. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow with a brand new show.